if we had never had the national energy program and we never had transfer payments to the East, the level of taxation that we could have had for the last 40 years. And it would have been like a flat tax of 8 to 10%.
So you don't love Canada? And my response is, oh my God, I love Canada so much that I'm willing to leave it to preserve what's left of it.
You know, we very strongly believe that if we save Alberta, we can save the rest of the country.
Hey guys, really, really interesting episode today. Today, we are going to talk about all things around Alberta separation. I know a lot of my listeners are in the US, but I also know a lot of my listeners in the US are really quite curious about what's happening in Canada. There are people all over Canada who are very, very, very intensely curious about what is going on in Alberta and what that could mean for the rest of Canada. Guys, today is going to be a fantastic show. I hope this is the kind of show that not only do you watch, but you share with other people so that we can raise awareness and understanding about what's really at stake here. New episode, Army of Great Men. Let's go. All right. So first off, we have to introduce our guests. So we have two members of the Alberta Prosperity Project, Tanya Clemens and Dr. Dennis Modry. First off, I know you two are both busy as you know what. Thank you so much for taking some time to sit with me today and to help educate our guests. Thank you both for coming on.
Our pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
So before we really get into it, who the heck are you two? Like what gives you the platform and the right to step up and do this? Who are you? How did you get involved in the Alberta Prosperity Project? We can go over your backgrounds a little bit and how you ultimately, basically put your whole lives on hold to, go all in on this. Let's talk about that. Tanya, you first.
Okay. I don't even think actually it's like the right to step up on it. It's just people that are very compelled and very passionate about what a sovereign Alberta could look like and what it could do for our families and our communities. I'm a farmer. We homesteaded in 1909. So that's like in my family's blood. We still farm. It's a grain farm, southeast of Calgary. I'm also a teacher by trade. And I got involved in the Alberta Prosperity Project back in, I think it was November of 2021. And the first event that I volunteered at, Dennis was speaking at it. And that was the first time I'd heard him speak. And I was just like blown away by some of the numbers that he was sharing. He was speaking about if we had never had the national energy program and we never had transfer payments to the East, the level of taxation that we could have had for the last 40 years. And it would have been like a flat tax of 8 to 10% per family. Wow. And I think I was thinking at that time about what that would have made a difference in my family's life and in all the families around us in our communities and the level of prosperity we would have then had to take care of each other. Yeah, and I think I just felt compelled to stay involved then. And as I started learning about the path that we had to actually be able to separate and become a sovereign nation, that there was a clearly laid out path, and Dennis has wrote about that in his papers. Yeah, the more I found out, is like I couldn't ignore this. We could do something great and be something great and really take care of each other.
Yeah, I love it. And like in a world where so many people were sitting at home, on our couches looking at all the craziness in the world, and so many of us feel helpless. To hear a story of a farmer from southern Alberta going, no, I can do something. I'm going to step up. Like, good on you. Like, this is, I love hearing things like that. It's great, Tanya. Yeah.
I think it kind of appealed. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Tanya.
I think it just appealed to my education background too, that this was an educational group, grassroots. I'd always been involved in politics. So I was like, that's a good fit.
Yeah. I love it. Dr. Modry, tell us about your background. I mean, you're not your typical doctor. You've got a bit of a background. Let's hear it.
Yeah. My background is actually kind of interesting. I eloped when I was 18. Then had 4 kids, but I graduated from medical school when I was 23.
Okay.
And had 3 kids at that point and 1 more the following year. But after 17 years in university at U of A, McGill, and Stanford, I came back to Alberta and started Western Canada's first heart-lung transplant program and directed that and the cardiovascular intensive care unit for the majority of my time in practice. But during that period of time in practice, I had been triggered when I was at McGill, because I was at McGill from 73 to 81. I was triggered by the national energy policy, which quite bothered me. I couldn't understand why it was implemented, and the carnage that occurred in Alberta afterwards I found very troublesome. And it didn't appear as though the federal government really cared about what was going on in Alberta. They were only really interested in the East. And so when I came back from Stanford, and that was in March of 84, and started the transplant program, I also got involved in provincial politics and served on the finance committee when Getty, Klein, and Stelmach were the premiers. And during that time, I had an opportunity to have input on policy behind the scenes in a number of different ways. And then in 2003, I conceived of an idea, and what was occurring at that time was the Premier, Ralph Klein, who was a good friend of mine, was having these heated battles with Jean Chrétien, and we could see the dysfunctional relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. And so I conceived of an idea, and the idea was to resolve the dysfunctional relationship. And that idea was centered on a question that I posed to Ralph, which was if he was the president or the prime minister of the sovereign country of Alberta, would he want Alberta to join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership?
Yeah.
And why that was relevant was because when I asked him the question, and he said, no, he wouldn't, in essence, I said, well, don't you think you have a moral and an ethical and an economic responsibility to Albertans to fix this dysfunctional relationship? And he said, I guess I do. And so I drafted a document which was basically the algorithm for Alberta to get the leverage it required to deal effectively with Ottawa. And over the course of the 5-6 months since I had that conversation with Ralph in January 2003, I ran the document through constitutional lawyers like Jerry Shapur, other politicians like Ted Morton and Gary Marr, and federal MPs like Don Mazankowski, other professionals and non-professionals, business people. And I presented the document to Ralph in his office in August of 2003, and we spent some time going over it. But it was titled Alberta at the Crossroads, Status Quo, Refederation, Autonomy. In my mind, autonomy meant Alberta independence or Alberta sovereignty. But the whole purpose of the document was leverage. And it was evident to me at that time that Alberta had no leverage. When you study the Constitution and you review the Clarity Act, which was developed consequent to Quebec's second secession referendum, you realize that truly Alberta has no leverage. It cannot deal effectively with Ottawa. There's this imbalance in power that was irresolvable, except for if Alberta had a referendum on secession. And at that time, in my mind, I was an advocate of refederation, fixing Alberta's problems within Canada. But over time, I recognized that was impossible. But I didn't recognize it until after I co-founded the Alberta Prosperity Society in February of 2022, and along with several other people. And I became the chair of the society, and it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational society that governs the Alberta Prosperity Project. And we wanted it to be nonprofit and nonpartisan because we wanted to be able to have an audience with everybody in the province of Alberta, regardless of your political stripe. Because the concept of Alberta sovereignty is not a left or a right issue. It's a pragmatic issue, and it really talks about self-governance and freedom from external interference. And over the past few years, we've had growth and we've had challenges, and the movement has waxed and waned a little bit. But at present, it is probably the largest populist movement that has ever occurred in Alberta and probably in Canada as well, given the numbers that we have now and the team that we have and the number of volunteers. So it's been a remarkable and satisfying journey to this point. But I have to tell you, Adam, this would not have been possible without literally tens of thousands of man hours to create the intellectual property that we have, and to convince the some 20,000 volunteers that we have now with us, and well over 250,000 people who have registered with us. So something has happened this time in terms of dealing with Western alienation that has never happened before. And we now have international recognition, which is really quite remarkable as well.
Yeah, well, and I think I know the tipping point, and it was this last federal election, right? Like for so long, particularly in Alberta, and Saskatchewan too, but the West, we've been just counting the days. When are we going to get a new government? Just hanging on. And then for the Liberals to win that election is it's like really that after all the stuff we did, and then it's a different name at the top, but it's the same party. Like it's exactly, they've got the same ministers, they've got the same philosophies. I think Carney does a better job of. He's got more tact, and he's certainly more likable and charismatic than Trudeau, and he comes off as more trustworthy. But I think the people who've been following it go like, no, this is way worse than Trudeau because he's smarter, because he's this, because he's that. I actually did some research on this. Took me 2 seconds. It was a really interesting number. Did you know that there's not one state in the United States where the voting ratio is more lopsided than Alberta's?
Like as far as like urban rural divide?
No. I mean, if you look at every U.S. state who voted for Democrats or Republicans,
yeah.
If Alberta were and we're not talking about Alberta joining the U.S. I'm just saying, like, if you look at the ratio of votes in Alberta, I think it's 26% of Albertans voted for the party that's in power. There's nothing even close to that in the United States. The worst in the United States is 35%. So, like, if you think about that, like, think about California, like how much they hate Trump, or the most lopsided Republican states, how much they, dislike the Dems. As we think the United States is polarizing, we think the United States is, really disconnected. Canada's way worse. The disconnect in Canada is notably greater than the one in the United States. We're just more polite about it.
I think that's true. Yeah. Even when I joined the Alberta Prosperity Project, I joined under the premise that we were creating an Alberta that was sovereign within or without Canada. And we spent like a year revamping the website and our educational materials. And I was like really a big push too, to make sure that we always included that within or without Canada, and within came first. Maybe like a little bit naive and not realizing how polarizing it absolutely was until this last federal election. It's like, oh, Alberta is done. We have no place of negotiating from a position of strength in this confederation. So we're going to ditch that within, and now we're just going to go without. Yeah.
Dennis, you mentioned the National Energy Project and or the National Energy Program. Sorry. There's a lot of people who are going to be voting in this election that were, or this referendum, that were far too young to have experienced that. I mean, we hear the stories, but so can you, because, I think there's a lot of people of your generation, Dennis, who look at that as sort of the beginning of the end, right? And, it's no, it's no coincidence that the guy who was in charge when that happened had the same last name as our previous prime minister. Neither of those Trudeaus were very well liked out here. But can you talk about what that was? Talk about the NEP. What was it? How did it impact things? What were the ramifications for Alberta and Canada? Sure. Just maybe give a little history lesson on that, please.
Sure. Let me go back in time before the National Energy Policy, because I want to demonstrate to your readers how the National Energy Policy reinforced the original policy and ideology, which was evident when Alberta and Saskatchewan joined Canada. And so there was a fellow, and I've spoken about this many times, by the name of Clifford Sifton. He was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who was responsible for bringing Alberta and Saskatchewan into Canada in September 1, 1905. But it's what he said to an audience in Winnipeg that was prophetic. It was prescient, and it explains why the National Energy Policy, partly explains why the National Energy Policy was implemented, and then subsequent to the National Energy Policy, why nothing has changed. So what he said in 1904 to this audience in Winnipeg was, "We desire," this is a quote, "we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire." Now, Canadian patriots in 1904 were the people living in the East, not in the West. So sure. We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies, that's the wealth of the prairies, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to its prosperity. Now, in that statement, there's nothing about the prosperity of the West. The intention was for the West to be a colony to serve the interests of Eastern Canada. That was the intention. It's very clear from that statement. And, if we look at what's happened then over the last 120 years, we have been pillaged and plundered for our wealth to serve the interests of the East. And we've had to endure cultural programs and ideas that don't necessarily align with the values and the culture of Western Canada.
Yeah.
So now keep that in mind when we go to discuss the National Energy Policy. Now, prior to 1980, when the National Energy Policy was implemented, Alberta was booming. There was a massive demographic shift of people and businesses from elsewhere in Canada and around the world. And why not? Liquid gold, oil. All five major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did, CIBC. And then all of a sudden, the National Energy Policy kicks in. And this was sold to Albertans and the rest of the country ostensibly as necessary to take some of the wealth from Alberta and give it to other regions in the country so they would have similar social programs. That's how it was sold. But the reality of it was that there were two other reasons which are the main reasons why the National Energy Policy was implemented. And the first reason is that the center of economic power was moving to Alberta because of the wealth. And Marc Lalonde, who was the Minister of Finance and the brainchild of the National Energy Policy, when asked why was it implemented, he said very clearly, "We cannot let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada." Okay? But there was another thing that was happening at that time. and that was the Quebec secession referendum. That was the first one in 1980. And the federal government was very nervous, and they were trying to keep Quebec in Canada. And so they made promises. And one of the promises was more wealth to Quebec as a result of the national energy policy and as a result of equalization. And so if you wonder why, we give $14 billion a year in equalization to the equalization program, and Quebec gets $14 billion a year, it's very simple. It's to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada. So basically, Quebec gets $2 of every $3 of equalization. So what happened after the national energy policy in Alberta? Alberta was devastated. Businesses folded. They moved out of the province, out of the country.
Yep.
People lost their homes. People lost their lives through suicide. It was an absolute mess. But did Ottawa do anything about it? No, they didn't. It was only until Harper was elected, that several years later, he ended the national energy policy. But Alberta suffered for the next 12, 15 years. And when we look at the circumstances since then, yes, Alberta did recover. It recovered to the point where in 2006, when Ralph resigned, Alberta had no debt, $26 billion in cash and assets on the book, a AAA bond rating, and the lowest employment in Alberta's history. And it was the number one GDP per capita region in the world. If you look at the region from Calgary through Edmonton to Fort McMurray.
Yeah.
And so then we see what's happened, not just in the last 10 years under Trudeau. Things have gotten materially worse. And as a result, trillions of increased dollar amounts have been printed, which has reduced our purchasing power substantively. And we've lost $500 billion in the last several years of planned investment in Alberta. $500 billion. That would have generated mega trillions of dollars of increased GDP per capita, which would have benefited not just Alberta, but all of Canada. It didn't occur because of federal regulation and taxation. And now you understand why Alberta, compared to all other industrialized countries in the world, our economic growth is dead last.
Yeah.
Think about that, dead last compared to all other industrialized countries in the world. It's a remarkable outcome by an extremely socialist government that I think you could legitimately say is a Marxist government that follows the playbook of the World Economic Forum as well. And so here's where we are. And the question is, for all of us, if we don't stand for something, we're going to fall for everything. And so what are Alberta's values? And, what culture do we want to maintain? And, as Tanya well knows, we're very much big on faith, family, and freedom as defining concepts of what the majority of Albertans are all about. And so we're trying to preserve and enhance our freedom and our prosperity and ensure that faith is not sidelined by federal dictates.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Dennis, when I had somebody ask me the other day, because I'm very curious about separation. I see a lot of the benefits. I might be a little bit naive about some of the challenges, which we're going to get into today, but I had somebody say the other day, well, so you don't love Canada? And my response is, oh my God, I love Canada so much that I'm willing to leave it to preserve what's left of it. Because, I used to tear up every time I'd hear the national anthem. You're at an Oiler game and there'd be, some veteran they honor. And I still tear up when I see the veterans, but like, I didn't know anybody more patriotic than me. And it's not about this or that or anything else. It's about the values. It's about, what my grandparents' generation went through to give us the life that we have. It's my understanding of Canadian history. It's my understanding of, I love this place.
Yeah.
But what this country has become, this is not the Canada that I love. This is not it anymore. And so I don't want to leave. Like, people say, well, then just leave. Like, if you don't like it, leave. I don't want to leave. This is my home. I'm fighting for my home.
Right.
Like, I'm fighting for my kids, my family, all that stuff, because I want this place to be what it could be based on the values that I grew up, looking at around this place. It's not out of hate or anything like that. It is about love for what this place should be. And, if I go, you go to Toronto does not feel like the country that I grew up in anymore. It does not. And I think the last election proved it, right? Like, I think from Alberta, yes, there's the economy and this and that and everything else, but the biggest reason, in my opinion, that Albertans were so opposed to the Trudeau government wasn't the money, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, it was the values. Like, you're just looking at it going, this guy does not represent who I am and who my family is and who I want my kids to grow up under. This isn't it. This isn't it. And then you tack on the money and everything else on top of it, and it's like, pretty aggravating. So, and I know that both of you, I mean, I don't even have to ask the question. I know that you are doing this out of love of the country and love of your values and love of what I can't imagine the shit and abuse that you two are taking from people, but you don't, like, I know you don't care because you're laying it on the line the way, my grandparents' generation did and all that stuff. Change isn't easy. You got to get your hands dirty and you got to get your, a little bit of dirt under your fingernails in order to really cause change. And so, like, I love the sacrifice. I love the courage that it takes. But yeah, anyway, we're going to get into more of that later. I want to get into the nitty gritty with the details.
Just one comment, Adam. Just one comment before you go. Just one comment. Yeah. We very strongly believe that if we save Alberta, we can save the rest of the country. And this is part of the reason why we're very encouraged by the wealth of support that's coming from elsewhere in Canada, because they know people who value faith, family, and freedom as well are very supportive of what we're doing, because they know that if Alberta can pull this off, that it will change the rest of the country as well for the better. And at some point, when Alberta is a sovereign country, it's very conceivable that Canada could make an offer to Alberta to rejoin, but it would be under terms that would be very different than what we're laboring under right now. Yeah. And I prefer to use the term sovereignty or independence as opposed to separation. Separation is kind of a negative. It's kind of like having your leg amputated. You're losing something. Sure. You see? So we prefer to use the term sovereignty, Alberta sovereignty or Alberta independence, than separation.
That's
and
fair.
If I could add to that too, I think that the notion of independence and sovereignty is scary to us because we've never done this. This is something new. But I was listening to a friend speak recently, and he said, this has been done thousands of times in history. Nations have formed new nations, and new nations have been born. And as far back as when they used to do it with parchment and pen. So right now, and this is what he said too, right now, at this time in history, when we have the entire knowledge of the world at our fingertips, this is something that actually is achievable and completely doable. And we actually are in the driver's seat as Albertans deciding what this new sovereign nation could look like and what it is that we value. And if it's faith, family, and freedom, that becomes the focus point of what a sovereign nation would look like.
I'm really glad you said that, Tanya, because, the whole conversation can be very scary for people. But when you word it the way you just did, it's exciting. Like, what a time to be alive. Like, what a gift it is to be at for me, I'm just, Joe Blow, but for you, like to be, right on the front lines
Joe
with
Blow
this
too.
thing, like what a time to be alive. Like it just doesn't get better. It's cool.
I know. And all those ideals that we've kind of like been sold and that we've valued of what Canada is and has been, that maybe isn't what it's true right now, we can still bring those ideals and form a new nation based on those. So yeah, that's the exciting part. And that's why we're driven by this, is the passion for and the love for our country and our province, specifically Alberta.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but the hair on my arms is standing up on end. So good. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of the logistics with all this, right? Because it is naive for anybody to think that we're going to have a vote in April and then the next day we're going to be a different country or a different, sovereign nation, whatever it's going to be. The referendum, should enough votes say yes, we would, vote yes to the referendum. Really what happens then is it triggers a negotiation. It's not an instant separation. Can you talk about the process that starts the day after the referendum, 51% vote yes? What happens next? What does the process look like?
Well, I'll let Dennis answer a lot of this because he knows all the details and he's kind of the founding father of this whole movement. But I know that everyone is invited to the table and has to come in good faith. So that was part of like the Clarity Act, that you're coming and actually going to speak in these negotiations. No one steps away from the table. No one does not come to the table. Everyone has to be a part of what this constitutional conference will be.
The legal pathway is also a political pathway for Alberta to become a sovereign country. Mm-hmm. And this occurred consequent to the 1995 Quebec secession referendum.
Yeah.
When the federal government, and it missed by a fraction of a percentage point.
Yeah, it was less than 1%. Yeah.
And the federal government was nervous that Quebec was going to leave, and they wondered whether or not a province had the right unilaterally to form a new nation. And they referred that question, obviously, to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court did a very extensive analysis. And from that analysis, the federal government legislated into being the Clarity Act. And the Clarity Act defines the pathway. And Tanya is correct, is that when you have a successful referendum, that it obligates the federal government and the other provinces to negotiate in good faith. But what the Clarity Act doesn't define is what happens when negotiations don't work out. But before we get to that point, let's imagine a scenario where we've had a successful referendum. And when it's successful, what I mean is that the House of Commons has approved the question that was posed to the Alberta citizens for the referendum.
Yeah.
And that the House of Commons has approved that the outcome is a true representation of the wishes of Albertans. And number three, that the House of Commons is in agreement that other interested parties were consulted, such as First Nations and other political parties in the province of Alberta. So therefore, negotiations then take place. And during those negotiations, it is interesting to contemplate what can happen here. If you take Daniel Smith's 9 demands, they were all in relation to the oil and gas industry, including single-use plastic, which comes from the oil and gas industry as well.
Yeah.
But more recently, the provincial government in Alberta, through the Alberta Next panel, wants to make constitutional changes. Okay, and there are 8 constitutional changes, such as wanting to have true representation by population. Also, wanting to have true regional representation in the Senate, and other things as well. But the difficulty is that in those negotiations, it does require opening and changing the Constitution. And the probability of getting the federal government and the other provinces to agree to these issues, I think, is an impossible task. Okay. And if it's an impossible task, why is it an impossible task? And let me just touch on the reasons. For example, ending equalization requires opening and changing the Constitution. Not the amending formula, but getting it out of the Constitution altogether. And there are these 4 hurdles. So one, you have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures agreeing to end equalization, or to end any of the 8 issues of concern that the provincial government has right now, that they proposed with respect to the Alberta Next panel. Then the second issue is you have to have the House of Commons. That's the second hurdle, where we don't have representation by population, agree to make a change in the Constitution, say to end equalization. Third, you have to have a majority vote also in the Senate, where we also don't have regional representation. And then the fourth hurdle is Quebec has a de facto veto on constitutional change, and they didn't even sign the 1982 Constitutional Act. And then finally...
Wait a second. Just 1 second on that point. So if 7 out of 10 provinces vote for this, Quebec still has the veto?
Quebec has a veto. Yeah.
So if 7 out of 10 provinces say, okay, we're ending equalization, Quebec can go, no, you're not.
That's correct.
I did not know that.
That's right.
My God.
And don't forget, the Maritimes also receive equalization payments.
Sure.
As well. So it wouldn't be just Quebec voting against ending equalization, but this is a broader issue because it touches negotiations for the sort of things that the provincial government would like to achieve, and it's just not feasible to think that we have a successful referendum and then the federal government and the provinces are going to agree to all of the things that Alberta would like to see happen. And the Premier has said if she didn't get even just those 9 demands, never mind the 8 demands that they've now submitted with respect to the Alberta Next panel, she has said that would be a threat to national unity. Well, she can only mean one thing. So this creates a constitutional conundrum, okay, that some people would say is a legal problem. And other constitutional lawyers would say, no, it's a political problem as opposed to a legal problem. So what do I mean by that? So let's go down the rabbit hole. We've had the successful referendum, and Premier Smith is now trying to negotiate because she said she would respect the result of the referendum. Okay, she said that publicly.
Yep.
So from there, she's trying to negotiate with her entourage what she would like to see happen in terms of changing the Constitution and achieving the objectives that she's outlined. But she's come up against a brick wall. She's not able to achieve these things. She might get 1 or 2 pipelines, but beyond that, it will be pretty much impossible. Because why would the East want to give up power to the West when they never have historically?
Oh, for sure.
So,
yeah.
So you see the dilemma that we have. So you can interpret those failed negotiations by saying, well, my golly, now what do we do? The negotiations have failed. We're stuck in Canada. And Canada is not willing to accept the express will of Albertans wanting these changes. And so, fortunately, there is another solution here, and we can move now to international law. So, and what I mean by that is when you look at the Supreme Court analysis of the Quebec secession reference, okay, the analysis is different from the Clarity Act. The analysis is the Supreme Court's analysis of what's happened around the world and what is international law. And whereas international law says a region doesn't have the unilateral right to leave, but it does have the legitimacy to form a new nation if there is evidence that those people, in which case we're talking about Albertans, feel as though they've been subjugated, dominated, exploited, or in any way have experienced thwarting of their self-determination, then they have a right to seek becoming a sovereign country. That's section 154. Section 155 of that analysis then adds further clarity and legitimacy in which if other nations acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty because Alberta's had a successful referendum, then politically, if not legally in relation to the Clarity Act, but politically, Alberta has the right to form a sovereign nation. And we know that the U.S. will acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty. And why we know that is because our general counsel and myself on April the 22nd spoke with the U.S. administration in Washington. So they're very supportive of Alberta becoming a sovereign country. And we expect that other countries that we'll be negotiating with will align as well. Because can you imagine Japan, Greece, and Germany wanting LNG, natural gas, and we have one of the largest between northern Alberta and BC. We have the Montney gas field, which is the largest in the world. So they want our gas, and I'm very confident that they would support Alberta becoming a sovereign country. And finally, there's just one other point, Adam, and that is there is historic reference to what I've just said when Kosovo declared its sovereignty unilaterally in February 2008 after a successful referendum. That is secession from being associated with Serbia. And 1 month later, in March of 2008, Japan and Canada both acknowledged Kosovo's newfound sovereignty. So don't you think it would be hypocritical for Canada not to acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty following a successful referendum?
That is very interesting. Yeah, like you can't have it both ways. You can't, well, they deserve it, but we don't. Yeah, that's...
Oh, they want it both ways. They want it both ways.
So, like, as you're saying all of these things, you know, and Tanya, like before we came on, we talked a little bit about the dominoes, right? Like, okay, if this happened, then this is going to happen. And so, like, one of the things I find really interesting about this is even if Quebec didn't have the veto, like, let's just say, okay, Alberta gets their 8 or 9 demands. All of a sudden, I think, and that would result in Alberta staying. I think that would also result in Quebec leaving. Like, as you say this, I'm not sure there's a path where Alberta and Quebec can stay in the same country. One of them's got to go, as you're saying this. Because if Alberta gets what they want, Quebec is going to be like, well, why would we stay? Like, the only reason they're staying now is because we're paying them to stay, right? But then if Alberta leaves, I think that I think it would be a very natural thing for other provinces to follow suit, right? Because then Saskatchewan and probably, you know, BC, I don't know if the whole province or most of the province probably looks at the rest of Canada and goes, well, who do we want to dance with moving forward, right? Like for Saskatchewan, I think it would be very logical for them to say, well, you know, we're way more aligned with what Alberta's doing. They pulled it off. They're doing fine. BC, same thing. Yeah, this is super interesting.
I think
I didn't know a lot of that stuff, Dennis.
Either way, if we happen to get all those demands, which we know is pretty much impossible, that ends a lot of the funding going to Quebec. If we are successful in forming a sovereign nation, that also ends a lot of funding that goes to Quebec. And before I have the value of freedom document that we put out, like the proposed fiscal policy, draft policy for Alberta. But before we even had that, I was speaking before about the amount of payments that we pay to the federal government that we get nothing back from in any kind of services. And at that time, what the numbers that we were using was $20 to $28 billion that we were giving to Ottawa with nothing coming back to us. And when you break that down per capita, per person in Alberta, man, woman, child, it's $6,000 per person in Alberta. So for like my family of 4,
per year.
per year, that's $24,000 that our family is giving away that we're giving no services from. Now, when we have the new numbers that have come out, it's even larger than that. It's like between 40 and 44 billion or 47 billion, I believe. So almost double that. The amount of wealth that we're giving away with no services or anything coming back to Albertans is astronomical. So if that doesn't lend to thoughts of what we could have if we had a sovereign nation, like I don't know what does, that will enrich and prosper all of our families and communities.
Yeah. And there may be people hearing what you said and go, well, that's not true. Like the federal government gives us this and they give us this and they give us this. The number that you're describing is the net
is the
deficit.
Overpayment. Yeah.
Right. So what that deficit is, if you look at all the money, whether it's personal tax, business tax, equalization payments, all that stuff, how much is Alberta sending to Ottawa versus how much is Ottawa sending back to Alberta? Exactly. And it's a deficit of, the number I saw the other day was 20 to 28 billion, but actually now you're saying it's actually more like
higher.
45.
Yeah. And so, sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
No, go ahead, Tanya. No, it is higher. It's much higher.
I would encourage that everyone actually looks up this. It's on albertaprosperity.com, albertaprosperityproject.com, all of our websites. It's, I think it really speaks to that large middle base that wants to know how a sovereign nation would actually fundamentally affect you as an individual and your family, because that's where our focus is, right? Is on faith, family, and freedom. So once you see these numbers and realize that your family would be much, much more prosperous in a sovereign Alberta and could then take much better care of your own community, like that's compelling right there.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So I've got a few more like kind of technical questions, because these are some of the things that people are saying to say, oh, you'll never be able to do it because of this. You'll never be able to do it because of that. Dennis, you touched on the Indigenous issue. Go over the issue in negotiation with, we sit on treaty land,
Sure.
all those things. Talk about that, please.
Sure. Before I do, I just want to touch on Quebec, because
Sure.
Mr. Legault said something that I thought was quite funny. He said, it would be really embarrassing to us if Alberta left Canada first. But in addition, what's happened is the Parti Québécois is leading in the polls. The next thing that happened, and you may be aware of this, I'm sure Tanya is that when King Charles was here, the Quebec legislature voted unanimously to end the relationship with the monarchy. Unanimously. So in my mind, this is a step towards Quebec having its next secession referendum. And I think it's important because you both touched on the idea that Alberta and Saskatchewan can't probably live in under the same governance structure. And that's probably true. So with respect to the Indigenous population now, this is an important issue, and there's, we need to understand that there are about 300,000 Indigenous people in the province of Alberta.
Yeah,
and just over half.
And total population's what, 4.5 million?
Right.
Ish.
Well,
yeah.
Just over 5.
Our total population is now 5 million. Yeah, that's from the latest statistics. And just over half of that 300,000 are First Nations, and just under half are Métis, and about 1% are Inuit. And they occupy 1.5% of Alberta lands in terms of the reservations. Okay, so, and we also need to acknowledge that ever since British rule, if there's ever been a population that's been subjugated, it's been First Nations. There's no question about it. And then later on, Métis as well. And so, from an ethical and a moral perspective, something needs to be done to, if in Alberta, to lift them out of poverty, lift those people, particularly those people on reservations, out of poverty. But at the same time, we need to recognize as well that there are many people who feel as though there should be one class of citizens as well. Okay. So when we say one class of citizens, we mean, well, should First Nations and Métis have special rights? Okay. There are people that don't think that that is right. And how do we navigate this dichotomy in thinking and benefit everybody at the same time? Well, I think there are solutions to this. And one of the solutions is, of course, for everybody to understand as well, is that whatever we have written in the Value of Freedom document, and there'll be more coming out in a proposed interim constitution. Remember, this is a proposal. The Value of Freedom document is a proposal. It's a draft. And we're already undertaking edits to it because we don't think that we know everything, and the public collectively knows more than we do. And so it's open for discussion and it's open for input. And so we are in the process of redefining things. But if you look at First Nations or the Indigenous in general, what are the options? Well, for them, they could simply stay in Canada and stay subjugated by the Indian Act and be dependent on the Canadian government, which I don't see how that's going to get them out of poverty, because here it is. We've heard for years that many First Nations people don't even have fresh drinking water.
Yeah.
And you would think that that should be something easy to resolve, but it hasn't been. It simply hasn't been. And so other options would include, what about becoming under the control of the Alberta government, which might be more beneficial. In either instance, their treaty rights would be respected. Okay, but you're still looking at this concept of two classes of citizens because they don't pay taxes, right? And that doesn't sit well with a lot of Albertans. All right, so what's another possibility? Well, another possibility is to give them the opportunity for their reservation lands to own property individually rather than collectively as a particular reservation, and also at the same time to give them the opportunity to share in the wealth that's generated from the development and transport of natural resources on their lands. And as you may have heard, some First Nations chiefs have made a demand to the provincial government to share in the royalties generated. And that's not an unreasonable request. They've asked for 2%. What the number is, I can't say whether or not that would be reasonable or not. But nevertheless, the concept would be that they could definitely benefit financially from the development of their own natural resources on their reserve lands, and qualify for royalty payments. In which case, that would pay for infrastructure and schools and clinics and et cetera, the sort of thing that you need for any functional society. So that's one option, and provide the financing over a period of 8 to 10 years or 5 to 10 years, whatever the amount of time is, to help transition them from where they are now to greater self-sufficiency and self-governance. And we would envision, of course, that in a new Constitution of Alberta, they would be at the table wanting to negotiate on behalf of themselves. And I think it would be not unreasonable to respect what has occurred that has been of benefit to them in the past. But now, how do we overcome the issue of the amount of disgruntledness that will occur with non-Indigenous individuals, particularly with respect to taxation? And there's actually a very simple solution to this that we haven't talked about. And even though I've weighed in on some of the document, the Value of Freedom document, and the Constitution. In the Constitution, we talk about the elimination of personal income tax. And in the Value of Freedom document, there's also the notion of eliminating personal income tax. Well, think about that. If over the course of the next 5 years, all Albertans, whether you're Indigenous or not, you pay no income tax, right? Then that solves the problem of the economic disparity in relation to taxation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So this would...
So it's not like you're saying, okay, we're going to tax you more. It's like, no, everybody gets the same treatment.
Everybody will have the potential, given the fiscal surplus capacity. And let me just touch on that for a second. So we give $70 to $75 billion every year to Ottawa. The maximum we get back is around 30.
Right.
Okay. So we've got 40 to $45 billion right there to lower income tax, to eliminate income tax. Also with the potential over time to eliminate property tax, in which case, for the first time ever, you actually will have the right to own property, which we can actually constitutionalize as well. And why do I say that? Because when Alberta becomes one of the least governed, least regulated, and least taxed regions in the world, the amount of foreign investment and local investment and Canadian-wide investment that will come to Alberta will be massive, because business will always relocate to the lowest governed, lowest regulated, and lowest tax region in the world. So there will still be some degree of corporate income tax, but you will be able to eventually, because of the massive economic stimulus that will occur because of investment, that we should be able to, over time, eliminate property tax as well. And so this is something that I'm really excited about. And the numbers actually prove it. Here's one thing I didn't say. Do you know right now, Adam, and Tanya knows this, but Frontier Center for Public Policy out of Winnipeg released a couple months ago a document, which was a research report on how much money Alberta loses every year because we can't get our oil and gas to international markets. And that's $26.5 billion a year. So add that $26.5 billion to the $70 billion, and now you're at virtually $100 billion, plus we generate $100 or $75 billion in taxation right now, from Alberta efforts.
So Dennis, what do you say to the people that say, okay, well, that's all well and good. Yeah. But like we'd be a landlocked country. Like why do you think we'd be able to, get our goods to tidal water if we can't now when we're in Canada? What makes you think we could if we were sovereign?
That's an excellent question. And it's one of the top questions that we get asked. But if we look at international law, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Articles 124 and 125, give landlocked countries the right to tidewater, to get their products to tidewater, and the right to transit across adjacent countries. Mm-hmm. And so that's one argument right there. So it wouldn't be legitimate legally, based on international law, to embargo Alberta. But let's just say, the rest of Canada was rather disgruntled and angry that Alberta has left. And of course, they will make all sorts of threats, and this will be fear-mongering to try and prevent Alberta residents from voting for sovereignty. But the truth of the matter is that right now, Alberta is landlocked. There's no ocean on any of our borders.
Nope, I checked. You're right.
Exactly. And what? When Alberta is a sovereign country, there still is not going to be any oceans adjacent to our borders. Correct. So what we really are is we're policy locked.
That's right.
And how do we get out from under being policy locked? Well, you can use Article 124 and 125, like I mentioned. But Alberta would have far more leverage and actually clout to deal with an intransigent British Columbia or an intransigent rest of the country. Because if we were blocked getting to Tidewater, then we would be able to block the transit of goods and services traveling across our borders. And we might start off by saying, well, we'll allow transit of goods and services east and west across our borders, but there's going to be a 50% tariff on everything going across, right? Now,
Yep.
we're not going to be impacted nearly as bad as the rest of the country would be because 90% of our trade goes south, okay? So,
Yep.
so it doesn't make sense. I mean, not only could we stop east and west transit of goods and services, we can also prevent flyovers over Alberta as well.
Well, and the other thing that happens, like, right now, BC gets most of their energy from us.
Right.
So if they just say, we don't want to deal with you, you go, all right, well, who do you want to deal with then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, who would you like to deal with if it's not us, right? People forget how many cards you have when you're one of the most resource-rich areas in the world. Like, you're the belle of the ball.
Yeah.
The whole world will be lining up to go, okay, yeah, we want to do business with you. They are right now, but as you said, we're not landlocked, we're policy locked. There's all the trade deals that could be out there for Alberta that are impossible with our federal government, whether it be from the tanker ban or this or that or anything else. Like, so when people say, well, you're landlocked, we're already like, so what? Like, this is what we're doing in spite of that.
We're landlocked,
and I agree,
but we'd actually be able to negotiate from a position of strength.
That's right.
And the best part is we would do the negotiation.
Right.
Right now, those negotiations are being done by a federal party who wants us weak, which is like mind-boggling, but like clearly, and you could say, oh, they do not. What indication have you seen that would say otherwise? Right? Like if you think that our federal government, if you think they're pro-Alberta, like, sorry, how? Which way? And the argument that, well, it's for the environment, it's for the environment. So you'd rather import oil from places that have zero environmental guidelines, zero environmental standards, instead of the highest ethically produced oil and gas on the planet, right? Like, but again, sometimes you just can't reason with people with things like logic and facts. Okay, national parks. What happens to national parks in this negotiation?
Sure. Okay, well, national parks are part of Crown lands, and 60% of Alberta is Crown lands, but 81% of that 60% is controlled by Alberta, and it's only 19% that is controlled by the federal government. So in negotiations, the expectation is that all Crown lands would devolve to Alberta. And this would be part of the negotiations. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. What about, there's a lot of people, and this is actually a large point of confusion for people both inside and outside of Alberta. Who owns the resources in this province? Is it Alberta? Is it the country? Does it depend if it's on Crown land or not? Who owns those resources?
On the Crown lands, it's owned by the provincial government, and the 19% of that 60% by the federal government. On private lands, what we would be proposing is that mineral rights would be owned by the people who own those lands. Right now, those property rights, to my understanding, and subject to verification, is that the province can cede those rights to business, which then will pay a I guess you could say, a royalty to the landowners. But this is one of the frustrations that private citizens that own private land that is exploited for its wealth is that private ownership should probably also include mineral rights as well.
Dennis, when you look ahead, because I know that you've been looking ahead for quite some time, you're not just looking at the referendum and what it's going to take to do that, but like a big part of this call has been, okay, what happens if the vote goes through? So all the negotiations that we're talking about, all of the things that are next, which part of that negotiation is the one that keeps you up at night? The one where you go, oh yeah, we might not get this part.
No, I don't think anything keeps me up at night. I think the most challenging issues are one that we've already touched on, and that is we really do want to lift the Indigenous population out of poverty, and we would like them to be, have a seat at the table in these negotiations, to talk to us ahead of time, to find out from their perspective, what they think would work. When we talk to some national Indigenous leaders, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot because we have spoken to them, they recognize the opportunities for them when Alberta becomes a sovereign country. So that is of some concern, not because we don't think we can win the referendum without them, but we advocate lifting everybody up. And that's why we say that this is not a left or a right issue, the issue of sovereignty. It benefits everybody. But the difficult negotiations are going to be in relation primarily to what happens to the 1.3 or $4 trillion national debt. What happens to the 360 or 70 or 80 billion dollars that belongs to Alberta that is in the Canada Pension Plan? What happens to other things that I think are more easily dealt with, such as the military, border security, information sharing, these kinds of things. And of course, another thing that you touched on is the issue of crown lands. What happens to those? So those are some of the big ones. And it's not our position as an educational society to definitively define how everything is going to shake out. Like I alluded to earlier, we've released this value of freedom document, but coming up is the interim constitution. And what we believe is relevant in the formation of a new governance structure based on a constitutional republic with far more checks and balances. Checks and balances very much like sort of a hybrid of the Swiss system, where people vote on very important issues, such as if you're going to raise taxes, or if you want to have just a brief tax because you want to build some mega bridge across some river or something like that, or tunnel through a mountain. So these are the kinds of things that that we think about with respect to having a governance structure that is far more robust and has far more checks and balances and is far more fair to everybody in the public. And we absolutely want to eliminate corruption in government. And we think we know how to do that. And I think you'll see how that can happen once we release the new document. We learned a lot from studying other governance models. And we learned a lot from the amendments that were made to the U.S. Constitution. And we think what we've drafted eliminates those problems. Now, right now, it's sitting in front of 4 different constitutional lawyers for their input. And just like the Value of Freedom document, it'll be released to the public in a form in which it's a draft. And we expect that following a successful referendum, there would be a constitutional conference in Alberta in which all interested parties would be represented. The document would be finalized and then subjected to the public for ratification in a referendum.
Yeah.
So,
it's so interesting, right? And I love the fact that you said, like, this isn't a left or right issue. And it's funny because, like, everything is a left or right issue today. Like, there's nothing that doesn't seem to be, polarized. But what's really interesting about this is if you actually look at all of this from a logical and factual and historical lens, under the Ralph Klein years, you said, like, we left with no debt, with a big surplus, with all that stuff. Alberta had the highest paid nurses, the highest paid teachers, the best social programs in the country. Like, you go down the line, like all the things that left-leaning people are adamant that they want more support for. Well, how do you think you're going to get it, right? Like, you get it by becoming wealthy. Like, that's how you do it. And as a province, historically, when those programs were at their absolute peak, it's when all of the policies that Ralph Klein, pushed for, created the wealth for this province, his economic philosophies, all those things. That's when we got all those things. Right. So if you want that, if you want all those things, you've got a way better chance of getting it with this than the path that we're currently on. Way better chance. Way better chance. Yeah. I know that a lot of people out there, and again, I want to dispel this myth, or maybe validate its truth. We'll see what your answer is. Is there any conversation about Alberta being the 51st state? Is there anything that, in your goals and in the path that you see, is that on the table for you or for us?
Tanya, you want to make a comment and then I'll comment?
Yeah, sure. I think that when we were first exploring the ability of Alberta to separate, to have independence and sovereignty, we looked at everything. Everything was discussed. But now we realize that even if you did want to become a 51st state, if there were people that were in favor of that, the first step is to become a sovereign nation first. So we become a sovereign nation. And then if Albertans wanted that, that's something that they could look to and pursue. But I really do believe that once we become a sovereign nation, why would you want to go back to being subjected to somebody else's will? We want to be subjected to our own will. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the whole point. Exactly. Yeah. Dennis?
Yeah, it's kind of like jumping from the CRA to the IRS. Why would we want to do that when we have the potential to get out from taxation altogether? The potential, or to at least have such low taxation that you don't even think about it, and your tax form is a postcard, fundamentally. But Tanya's exactly right. You'd have to have a second referendum after you are a sovereign nation. But when Jeff and I were in Washington, before we even sat down, the first comment that came to us was from the other side, from the U.S. administration, was, we're very much in support of Alberta becoming a sovereign country, and we recognize that Alberta joining the U.S. is not in the cards. Okay. Now, if you analyze that a little bit, that last point, look at the way the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate is constituted. It's a slim majority for the Republicans and a slim in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, right? If Alberta was to have a referendum, a second referendum, and wanted to join the U.S., you would have to have a majority vote in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. A 2/3 majority, not just 50% plus one, but a 2/3 majority. And so the probabilities aren't there right now. But when we were developing the Alberta Prosperity Project, we envisioned a number of different scenarios. One, Alberta becoming a sovereign country, which is where we're at right now. But before that, we also considered Alberta joining the U.S. We also considered Alberta aligning with Saskatchewan, Central and Northern BC, the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, none of it, over time, and becoming a Western Canadian country as well. But we recognize that, we can only herd so many cats in one direction. And Alberta is in the strongest position to pull this off, to pull sovereignty off. And we think the dominoes will fall once Alberta becomes sovereign. We think Saskatchewan will follow. BC may split. Yukon, Northwest Territories, each of which have only about 50,000 people, may join us as well. So it's hard to know exactly how this is going to play out, but we think the dominoes will fall in that way. And so those are the outcomes that we conceived of, but we basically, coned it down to one outcome, the one that can lead to everything else.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, like, when you get divorced, like, you don't want to jump right back into a relationship, right? Like, you kind of want to stand on your own 2 feet for a minute. And that's what I look at this as. I look at it as, I know it's an ugly word, but, I don't know anybody who would stay in any relationship that was as lopsided as this one, whether it be a marriage, a business relationship, a sports team, like if you're a part of a team, I don't know any other scenario where, it's this one-sided, and the part who's, on the negative side of that one-sided relationship would just go, well, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm just going to stay with this forever. Right. Like, eventually you have to stand up. And yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, I think it's a wonderfully exciting time. And frankly, for someone who appreciates history like I do, it's cool to be a part of this part of history.
Yeah.
Right? Like I want to tell my grandkids tell me about what happened in 2026 again, Grandpa. Yeah. Well, I got a story for you.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. And I think that, there's a lot of reasons why the rest of Canada is looking at this, but I think that we as Albertans underestimate how hard the rest of the world is paying attention to this. There is precedent, as you said, like there have been times this has happened in the past, but this is a big one. And the ramifications that the world will see from a strong Alberta are huge, right?
We have the opportunity of being a bright, shining light of freedom and prosperity.
Absolutely. And were you at the event with Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson when they came to
Yes.
to have
Did you see Tucker Carlson hold up his Al freaking Berta shirt?
No, did he hold it out? Oh, that's so.
I gave him that shirt.
Oh, love it. Yeah. So, like, one of the things that was said at that event, which, I guess I was really caught off guard by, because this was before the last provincial election. And they said, what you probably don't realize is how closely the rest of the world is looking at this. Because at the time, the United States was under the Dems. They were talking about the balance of power in global energy that is right now, like, hanging in the balance. And Alberta is one of the only true free places in the world that can contribute to the global energy situation like Alberta can. Right. And there's a lot of interesting people that would love to see, love to see Alberta be neutered, because it just gives them the rest of the power. So as important as that provincial election was for what was happening in the world, this is 10 times more than that. This changes everything globally. And part of the problem with that is we've seen how globalists can impact policies in Canada and everywhere in the world. And so, we're not just going to be fighting, amongst ourselves on this. There's going to be outside influence like crazy as we get closer to this. And so that's why I think conversations like this one are so critical to get from, whatever the latest poll was, 37.5%, get up to 51. Like, it's a big hill to climb, because we're going to be up against inside influences, outside influences, all sorts of things that are going to be trying to do everything they can to make sure this doesn't happen.
You bet.
Yeah. So, and actually, we're going to leave on this one last question, and I'd like to ask you both. So, I think the latest poll we saw was it 37.5%? Is that right, in favor of sovereignty?
I thought it was actually much higher. I thought it was closer to 47. But
Yeah.
47.
There's one on 47%. Yeah. But
depends which poll.
Can I touch on polling for a second here?
Yeah, please.
Because I think this is really an important point. We still live in an era of cancel culture.
Oh, yeah.
And so when people are polled about subjects that may be seen by some as controversial, they won't answer the question. And when you look at the outcome of the trucker convoy and people who had their accounts frozen, there's tangible evidence for what I just said. People did get canceled. They had their accounts canceled. In the U.S. election, the federal election last November, polling did not predict the outcome. Even the exit polling didn't predict the outcome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how accurate are the polls? I'm not sure. But here's one piece of hard evidence that makes me think that we could already be at a plurality, but I don't know that. When we had the 2021 referendum on ending equalization, 62% of Albertans voted to end equalization. Could that be a proxy for how people feel about Alberta sovereignty? I don't know. It's an interesting thought exercise.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. And like, I think, and I'm sure you were in that same boat. Like when that thing came down, my question wasn't, like about the 62, it was about the 38. Like, who are the 38% of people that wanted to keep that going? Like, again, left, right, or otherwise. What exactly about this are you in favor of keeping? Like, I just get it. That boggled my mind. But I think it speaks to the lack of understanding and education that's such a significant.
Well, that's partly true, but it also does relate to ideologically, there are those who want the means of production to be looked after by the central government. They like the idea of being controlled. They like the idea of not having to work, etc. And if we stay in this federal government and the voting age is lowered to 16, which is the plan, and a universal basic income of $2,000 a month kicks in when you're 17, you can see how this whole future is going to create a hollowing out of the middle class, because people feel as though if they can just get paid for doing nothing, $2,000 a month, then there's going to be a perpetual underclass and a perpetual elite class. And so in any case, this is important to understand if we don't do something.
I'll tell you, Dennis. So I think this is the 30th or 31st episode I've recorded of the Army of Great Men. I think there were a bunch of them that really impacted me deeply. The one that really, really hit home was I interviewed a friend of mine from Venezuela about the fall of Venezuela from someone who lived it. And I'd encourage both of you to listen to it. I'll send it to you both after. But like, you listen to what led to the fall of Venezuela, and you're listening to it if you've got the Canadian lens and you're going, wait, check, 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 check. Like, you're just looking at the boxes and then you see the results and you're just like, oh my God, like, this is where they're trying to take us. Like, you can see it. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots and draw the comparables.
Right on.
When you look at where Canada is heading from an economic perspective, I'm sure you've seen the report, but there was an analysis done in Toronto, or sorry, they took a couple in Toronto, each making $200,000 a year. And then they showed, okay, what's the total amount of tax that they pay, right? And it, like, when you add up, income tax, HST, PST, property tax, vehicle insurance, like, you go down the line, it was like 70% of their income goes to tax. And then you look at it and go, okay, well, so is that going to get better like the way that we're spending money, the way that our, like we're going to have as a country, we're going to have a $92 billion deficit this year without a budget, which is also a whole conversation. Yeah. But then you look at it and you go, okay, so do you think that the overall tax number, do you think that's going to go up or down? Like there is no scenario on the path that we're on where this goes down. And frankly, like as much as I like Pierre Poilievre, I'm not sure he can fix it. Like I don't think a new government can fix it. I think it's too far gone. So as the old analogy, right? You put your foot in quicksand, do you just let your whole body sink, or do you chop your foot off and hop away? And like that's maybe a bit of a dark way of looking at it, but we can either sink with the ship or we can go our own way. And if we go our own way, Alberta will thrive. And the other thing that would happen, you mentioned about the migration that would happen. There are a great many people in the rest of Canada who will be banging on the door to come here because they see it. Like they see it. I giggle, oftentimes I'm in the financial world, and I always giggle when I'm in meetings with people from downtown Toronto, and they just pat you on the head, right? Like, oh, isn't that nice? This little dummy from the prairies thinks he can talk with us. Isn't that fun? And they underestimate us like crazy. But then if you go into the rural parts of Ontario and everything else, they align way more with what we're doing than the people in their ivory towers in Toronto.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're right.
Dennis and Tanya, first off, I can't thank you enough for your time today. But more important than that, I can't thank you enough for your time for this movement, right? However this goes, however this ends up, you two are going to be able to put your head down at night, knowing that you did everything you could. And I know, sorry, I might get a little emotional here. I know that you're not doing this for yourselves. I know the sacrifice that you're making. You're not doing this because it's going to make you, rich, which everything in politics now seems to be so selfish. You're doing this for your kids, for the kids you don't know, for the next generation. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I hope that people, when they're listening to this or they're thinking about sovereign Alberta, that you're not getting caught up in that like highly intellectual, complicated conversations that we're going to have, but really bring it back to your faith, your family, and your freedom. And right now, is your faith, your family, and your freedom, are they being honored and respected by where we are in Confederation? Or is there a possibility that your faith, your family, and your freedom could be very honored and very respected in something new that we get to create, that is the basis of?
Yeah, I love it. And I love how you say that, Tanya, because for me, the economic benefit is the bonus. It really is. That's the bonus. It's the values. That's why I'm fighting, because I'm a values-based person. I always say it's easy to have values until you're tested. And, it's not, sometimes you got to do hard things to preserve those values, right? As our grandparents did and beyond, right? Sometimes you have to make sacrifices to preserve those values because they're going to be challenged and tested by people who don't agree with them. And it's easy to lay down. It's easy to just take it. We're not doing that. Thank you both for your time today. And I'd love to stay in touch. Next time
of course,
we're in the same market, I'd love to get together and
share coffee. Let me share something with you.
Yeah, Dennis.
If you want an amusing article, I just had one released in the Western Standard this morning.
Sure. Okay, I'll look it up and I'll post the link for our viewers.
It's okay. Yeah, you'll get a kick out of it anyhow.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Both of you, thanks so much. And there we go, a new episode, Army of Great Men's in the books. Thanks everybody. And I've actually got some really interesting interviews coming up. One of them with Dr. Blaine Aiken, Dennis, who I know you're very familiar with. He's the one that wrote all the results on COVID and how that all went down. You're going to want to hear that story. He's a really interesting guy. And anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. And Dennis, Tanya, thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks for inviting us.